You are listening to the Spent the Rent podcast. And now, here's your host, Patty Rose.
Hello, I am Patty Rose, and welcome to the Spent the Rent podcast. This is episode 205 episodes, season 6. I am joined today by Kevin Cronin. Kevin is an organizer with the Eugene Tenant Alliance, and I wanted to have you on today to talk about housing in Lane County and talk about some of the new renter protections, some of the new protections for renters in Eugene and what that's going to impact our community. You've been working really hard behind the scenes with that. And then also talk a little bit about Tuesday's election. We had a little bit of some local stuff on the election. So we're going to touch on how the Tuesday's election affects us in Lane County. So Kevin Cronin, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I think this is like the third time you've been on the show. You did the trivia show. I've interviewed you when we first met each other because you do a lot of work for housing. And, it's funny because the Spent the Rent podcast, that has nothing to do with housing. It started as my, band, like my music record label. But I think it's kind of funny how it's become, like, hey, I don't have any more money because I'm getting pinched, and so I think that it's got double meaning, and I think that's why we're here. So first of all, I want to talk about some renter protections, phase 2 renter protections, but can you talk, what was phase 1 before we get to phase 2, because we didn't cover phase 1. Do you remember what was on phase 1?
Yeah, so Eugene Tenant Alliance, which is a grassroots political action committee that represents renters taking action in politics here in Lane County. We supported Eugene Renter Protections Phase 1, which included an investment in the city to provide additional services like housing navigation for folks that might have some additional barriers to finding housing, like people with children, people with disabilities. And we have a housing navigator now, and that is really, really great to see.
So there's still one person, or is it like an organization? How does that work?
So the city has a Eugene Rental Housing Navigator, and that's the first permanent staff that is focused on renters and housing. That's not necessarily has another job within the planning department. So
yeah, so they can be totally focused on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the biggest issues facing our city. And so them investing in staff really has given them capacity to sort of engage and meet people's needs.
Yeah, on the podcast, I've talked to so many different groups of people that are working to combat homelessness in different ways. One of the things that you've been so focused on is keeping people in their apartments, really, or in their rentals. It's a good thing to see, because you got into this, and we talked about it the first time you came on. Anyone interested, you can go back and listen to your personal story more. But you had talked about, having a no fault eviction, finding yourself kind of in a situation where you weren't prepared to be looking for a place because you just didn't expect it to come up, and then all of a sudden, boom. But then, without getting too deep into that, we did cover that. You have, anyone listening can go back and listen to that. Now, fast forward, you're a homeowner. You're buying a home. So you're a success story in this, and so as am I. And I never imagined that could be the case. So I just want to say that there is hope for people out there that are struggling, because I am by no means a rich man, and I was able to swing it. So it's really important that we keep people in their homes, and one of the ways that that's being done now is by putting a little bit more pressure on some of the landlords, so that they can't kind of, use your life as just a way to kind of make a little bit extra. Let's talk about some of the protections. Here's some of the protections: limiting the amount of money a landlord can charge for a security deposit equal to 2 times the cost of monthly rent. Processing applications on a first come, first served basis, relocation assistance, which we're going to talk about at length. I want to talk at first about the first one, or the second one, processing applications on a first come, first served basis. Why is this so important for people?
What you'll see landlords, accepting applications, and then they'll go through and they'll cherry pick the white sounding name.
Sure.
And we know from a bunch of research, particularly shout out to the National Center Law Center on Poverty and Homelessness over in Virginia. They put out a study that says that Black, Indigenous, and people of color face a lot more barriers at the application stage, and so first come, first serve puts them on an equal playing field with everybody else, and it's just like you just got to get your application in.
Sure. And then also the cost of the application is now capped, and this is something that you guys worked hard on. I mean, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So we did pass a $10 cap on application fees. However, a Lane County Circuit Court judge has struck down that law.
Really?
Yeah. And so the reason being that this is the state's jurisdiction and the city doesn't have the authority to do that. That's, if the state is more than welcome to do it. We introduced a bill last legislative session to cap application fees statewide. That has resulted in a legislative work group that is either looking at banning application fees entirely or creating a universal transferable application.
Yeah. I mean, at first when it went in, and now it's being fought in the courts, but it was a cap that went from, I believe, $40 down to $10, which I think is way more reasonable. And sometimes putting these arbitrary caps, though, just like it's tough. There is, and we're going to talk about the counter argument a little bit, before we're out of here. But there is two sides to this, and it's tough because I think a lot of times when people think of landlords, they think of these massive conglomerates, and it's not always that. Sometimes there's people that have 3, 4, 5 rentals, and that's their income, and so these things make it tough and make the margins slim, just like anything else. And I worry sometimes that some of these things with tinkering with what it's going to end up doing is it's going to make it to where it's just not reasonable for the smaller landlords to own stuff, and it's going to only be the bigger ones. So there's kind of there's always going to be, pros and cons. Relocation assistance, I think, is something that's really important and we have to talk about because this is pretty monumental. What does that look like? I mean, basically, if somebody is evicted, I wrote down some of the requirements because I think that this is really important to understand when we have these conversations, because people that will be against these protections are going to not include the requirements to be eligible for relocation assistance when they talk about it. They'll be like, we can't afford to pay for somebody that destroys the house. Well, no, if you're evicted for cause, then you're not going to get relocation assistance. So explain to me what relocation assistance is, and then we can go from there.
So relocation assistance is where, in Eugene at least, a landlord has to give you a payment of twice your monthly rent if they serve you a no-fault termination notice for a landlord-caused reason. So this would be a landlord saying, hey, I actually need to move back into this unit, and so I'm displacing you. I'm going to move in, right? That's legal to do. It's not the fault of the tenant, and the landlord can move in. Now, also, one of the leading reasons that we see is landlords coming in and saying, we want to remodel the unit and charge more rent. And so that's a profit-seeking decision. And without relocation assistance, the burden of that decision, the economic consequences, falls on the renter instead of the person who's profiting. So it's really important that we shift that a little bit.
Sure. And I think, I think it's really important to point out that you're not going to get it. Like I said, if you destroy the house, it's not going to happen, and so really listen to people when they're talking about this. When you have people on both sides of this debate, really pay attention to what they include in the details, because there is requirements to be able to be eligible for that. Not one of the options is if you had signed a lease for less than a year and the landlord does not give you a chance to renew it, and you were under the impression that you were going to be given a chance, that would be an eligibility where you're eligible for that. Is that correct?
So I believe the city actually carved out that provision. So if you have a year-long lease and you get a non-renewal, then you would get assistance. But if you're, say, sign a 9-month lease and you get a non-renewal, then you don't get the payment. However, most leases automatically renew. If neither party takes any action whatsoever, your lease is probably going to automatically renew to month. Certainly after the first year, Oregon state law just has that rollover provision. So most people are assuming that their lease is going to renew.
Yeah. Yeah, and now, because I don't know if this was in the first phase of protections or how the cap came to be, the cap on increases. And I want to hear what you have to say about this. I don't know a ton about this, but I know that, you and a bunch of different people across the state were pushing for, and I say you, I mean the Eugene Tenant Alliance. There's a lot of people behind the scenes with Kevin working on this, but that we're pushing to put a cap on how much they could increase your rent every month. And was it Kate Brown, or how did that come to be with that? It was a cap of 14.9%. How did you can explain that situation? But it seems like it might have been it backfired to where now that's set a precedence that's what's going to happen. Landlords are going to raise it by 15% every single year. Is that something that you've been hearing? Or
yeah, so let's go back to 2018,
this is a long one.
Right? So
yeah,
in 2018, in my neighborhood in the Whitaker, we saw rents double. And so people were like, entire buildings were getting no cause evicted. People were resetting the rents and charging upwards of double of what the market was. And so the state was like, holy smokes, all these people are being displaced. We're creating a lot of homeless folks. We need rent stabilization. And so they came up with 7% plus CPI.
What is CPI? Do you know?
The CPI is the Consumer Price Index. So that's basically it's inflation, right? And so then in 2022, we had a record year for inflation. And so the rent increase was that 7% plus inflation number. So that's how we got to 14.6%.
Inflation is actually a code word for Democrats having to fix the Republicans cutting taxes for the wealthy in their no, I'm kidding. but that's basically how it works. So, I want to say this, full disclosure. I've been producing a show. Shout out to Vince Casey. He's the host of the Eugene Real Estate Podcast. I've been producing that show. And this last episode that we recorded for him here in the studio, it's kind of neat because it's a complete counterbalance argument. When you have a lot of his guests are the realtors in the community. So a lot of them are landlords, and they're going to have a much different opinion on this. And so I think it's really important to listen to what they have to say. And I think it's really important to take to heart the fact that not every single landlord, it looks the same, And so these are going to really hurt some people, some of these protections, because there's just small margins. But that being said, I'm a little bit more concerned with every individual's first home than I am with their third and fourth investment,
That's
and
right.
so that's kind of where I fall on that. But hey, shout out to Vince with Eugene Real Estate Podcast. And if you're looking to buy a home or whatever, that's a cool podcast with a lot of information to listen to. Some really, really smart people in our community doing awesome stuff. Let me see. I just want to, this is one of those things where I definitely do side with renters, but it's, you have to really be careful getting super rash emotionally when you're talking about it with certain people, because there's a lot of opinions on this one across the board. I guess it goes with everything. So I want to talk real quick. And I mean, you and I have very little connection to the hospital, but I still want to talk about how detrimental this is going to be to our community.
Yep.
and hear what you have to say, that at December 1st, if nothing changes, Sacred Heart Medical Hospital at the University District is going to be closing. They basically have decided that it's not profitable. I've heard a lot of different reasons. I've heard earthquake safetyness, which I don't know if that's true, because there's also talk about someone else coming in and buying it. But I just want to hear what you have to say about how this could be so detrimental to our community. My partner's mom has been staying with us because she's been dealing with some health issues, and she wanted to go to the emergency room a couple days ago, but we were like, well, let's call and see how long the wait's going to be. So we called Mackenzie Willamette. I believe they called. I can't remember which one they called, but one of the two, both in Springfield, and the wait time was over 7.5 hours. So this is with the hospital on campus still existing. And so I can't imagine what it's going to be like when this closes. What are your thoughts on when you found out about the closure?
I'm very concerned with the hospital closing. It's the only hospital that's on my side of the river.
Yeah.
And so if there is an earthquake, it'll be, tough to get to the hospital. We only have 3 bridges.
Yeah.
And so, that's critical infrastructure. And so we need a hospital on this side of the river for, a metropolitan statistical area of our size.
Yeah.
And so that is a real resiliency problem.
Yeah. The last episode I had mentioned how I think it was kind of a bad look on and just the timing of the way that the media was dropping stuff for the mayor, for Lucy Venice, because in 1 week she says, the news breaks, hospitals announce that they're not going to be staying open, that they're going to be closing their doors. She says that she had no idea. And I'm like, oh, coming out of a pandemic and you had no idea the future of the hospital in your town and you've let the other hospital leave. And then the next week she says, I'm not running for re-election, but here's the person that I think you should vote for. I think I would not want her endorsement in that timeline. But anyways, yeah, it's going to be detrimental. We'll see what happens. I'm really holding my fingers crossed that someone else is going to swoop in. And I think competition would be a good thing. Even though I think that healthcare shouldn't be a business. That's a whole different argument. But we'll see what happens. I do know that there is a reality to the fact that a lot of the customers or clients at that hospital are not, they're people that kind of are eligible for insurance, but aren't applying for it. So you have a lot of unprotected people being seen, and those costs can get insurmountable. And that is an issue that I don't know if OHP needs to automatically sign people up or something like that. We can see.
You can sign up for OHP up to 2 months after you're first seen for medical stuff. So
that's a huge thing to know.
Please do sign up for OHP if you're income qualified.
Yeah. And so, repeat that if you find yourself uninsured and you say you don't have a job, so you have no income, then you're definitely eligible for OHP. Yep. If you end up having to go to the emergency room, because I know a lot of times people are afraid of going to the emergency room. And yes, we just talked about how it's going to take you 3.5 hours or longer to even get seen. But still, if you need to go to the emergency room, don't let the fear of I have no insurance be the barrier for you, saving your life, because there's ways that you can get assistance. I, at one point, was able to get on bridge assistance where I didn't have insurance after the fact. And it was a long, stressful process, but there is still hope out there. I'm just saying for people that you don't want to just sit at home with your foot rotting or whatever.
One more thing about OHP is that we have a Medicare 1115 waiver, which is going to change some of the things that Medicaid and OHP will pay for. So if you lose your job, that's a life-changing event. You can apply for OHP, and then starting next year, you'll actually be able to get up to 6 months of rent assistance through the Oregon Health Plan, because turns out that having a stable place to live is a key factor in your healthcare recovery.
Wow. It'll be interesting to see how this stuff is written with different types of jobs, because I think about Uber workers and all that kind of stuff, but we saw it in the pandemic. And I think that they, as much of a mess as the unemployment stuff was, they now probably learned a lot. Yeah. So hopefully. So, hey, let's move a different direction and talk a little bit about the election Tuesday. This is a midterm off year election, not even midterm, off year election. It's going to get a little bit less splash. The national stuff we'll talk about briefly in a bit. I think the big news was that Ohio voted pretty overwhelmingly to add a woman's right to choose to their constitution, to their state constitution. So that's huge. Every election since the overturning of Roe v. Wade has gone pro women's rights. So that's a good thing and hopeful thing to see. But locally, I just wrote down a few things. Lindsay Leach was elected to city council. This is a seat that I have talked about on this podcast ad nauseum. This was a seat that was vacated by recall in Ward 7, Claire Surratt's seat. I think this was an absolute tremendous waste of time for this recall. Now, Leach is elected, so you basically get somebody that I don't, it's a nonpartisan seat, but I think that they're more liberal than Claire Surratt was to begin with. So it's so funny because the people that were upset about it are like, we don't like this. And they get someone who I think I support. Lindsay Leach, from everything I've been reading, is great. But it's just silly, these recalls.
Fun fact, Lindsay Leach is is a landlord, and Eugene Tenant Alliance, we endorse her because we believe that she's someone that we can work with.
Do you see that? It's not about labels. It's about integrity in the individual. No, Lindsay's great. And the unfortunate thing about this recall is that Lindsay now winning this seat is going to have to run for re-election in like 2 hours, because in the next election will be in November, and she will have to run again to hold the seat. And so, because this is a continuation of the previous, with Claire Surratt's seat.
Yep.
So yeah, it's just fun. Lots of money spent, and there was also the other recall. Where was that? The Paul
Hovey. Yeah, that recall got defeated as well. That was a 90-10. I've never seen a beatdown like that in Lane County politics.
90% against a recall. It's just silly. And you saw it in California with Gavin Newsom. That these recalls are it's a waste of time.
They had some really talented, impressive organizers working on that campaign.
Yeah, on the Paul Hovey.
Yep. Yeah,
for sure. One of the things I thought was pretty notable, Pleasant Hill voted overwhelmingly to support a permanent tax with the dissolution and merger of both the Goshen and Pleasant Hill fire departments. Springfield Eugene did this a while back, where they took their 2 fire departments and merged them into one, which gives them a lot more capability to just make decisions on the fly. I had Randy Groves on. He's the former fire chief. And he said straight up, he's like, just like anything, there's pros and cons. He's like, I'm a huge supporter of this. I pushed for it as the chief. That's with Springfield. I don't know a ton about Goshen and Pleasant Hill, but my coworker, the gentleman that owns the barbershop that I work at, he lives in Pleasant Hill, and I've learned a lot about the community, by being friends with him. And it's a great community out there and great people. And I'm really stoked that they decided to invest in this, because it's a substantial amount of money. I mean, it's like it's $2.70 per $1,000 on property tax. So I'm terrible at math, but my partner's not, and she told me that it's somewhere around for a $300,000 home, that's like $400 a year. So it's a noticeable amount of money that you're going to have going directly for the fire department. It's really interesting for homeowners in Oregon, because when you get at the end of the year, you'll get a little thing for your taxes, and it breaks it down literally how much money you're paying dollar by dollar for each thing. And we went through the list, and I was like, yep, I don't think there's anything on that list I'm willing to cut, because they're really important services like education and safety and all, the
parks,
sure, yeah. So Douglas County did Douglas County things, and they voted not to support their school safety or upgrade their softball stadium and replace their gym. I think that's a little bit too harsh of a way to frame that. But when I read it, that was the first thing that I could see. It was that they didn't want to support the schools. But I do think it's important for small towns, smaller areas. I know Douglas County's not, Roseburg's not tiny, but I do think it's important for places to be a little careful with their budgets and whatnot. But when you see places voting down supporting schools, I don't know the whole situation, but
it's super tough to pass revenue in these rural counties.
Yeah. And it's tough because, people are like, why are this happening like this? And it's like, well, you don't ever want to help fund it. So you said you wanted to talk about the governor's housing production committee.
Yeah. So I just wanted to, I'm really, one of the things I'm looking forward to most about next year's legislative session is the governor is bringing back her housing production goal. And she has put forward a housing production framework where we can get to building 36,000 new homes a year. And so, she's proposed a lot of interesting things, and to basically a huge toolbox for cities and counties to sort of take up the call to action and really dig down and invest. So I'm really looking forward to that. We heard again that evictions are on the rise, but these are for-cause evictions, mostly for non-payment. And so landlords support new investment in rent assistance. And so we're going to be pushing for that quite hard in the legislative session, because when you invest in rent assistance for people, we're talking about people that work retail jobs, people that work at a restaurant or so. Those are the people that are most impacted by rent assistance, because lower income people, they typically can have a subsidy from the government. So this sort of like middle income, not even middle income, but these folks, the average cost of rent for someone being assisted is about $1,800. So we are talking about those, frontline workers, and it's really important for the state to have their back, and make sure that they can get through this recession.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's really cool what you guys are doing. I want to this is always a question I want to ask that I never know how to frame, and I never really know how you guys would want to answer it. But I mean, I'll say a lot of words a lot of times. I'll say stuff like, this is a housing advocate, and I don't think people understand what that means, what that entails. And this is such a tough question of what it is that you do. But by you inviting me, we did something. It was actually about the recall election, where you invited me on to kind of co-host and trying to sit in with the Eugene Tenant Alliance. You were hosting a forum with potential candidates in the River Road area. It was at Alluvium. And so this is one of the major things that you do. You hold these events where you have people from the community speak, either potential candidates or current occupants of seated, of elected office. But that's one of the major things you do is basically create a bridge, right, from the lawmakers and the citizens. Is that one of the things that you would say is like a beneficial thing? What's another way? I mean, what does it look like with advocacy for housing? I mean, you're basically just constantly learning about the rules, the laws, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So in my day job, I actually work for the Trade Association of Affordable Housing Developers. So, people that build new low-income housing in Oregon. So a lot of that sort of day-to-day work involves with meeting with them, figuring out their hurdles. The state is redesigning how people get access to funding for affordable housing. And so, I've read all the manuals of like, what do you need to do to build it? And so,
right,
just getting in there and having these important conversations with, agency staff and decision makers about how can we do this better?
I've noticed anytime these topics come up in the local news, your name is always your name is always the one that people go to. The journalists and whatnot are like, oh, there's an issue with renters. Let's call up Kevin. A lot in the Register Guard and that kind of stuff. Are you getting feedback from the opposition, from people that are kind of challenging some of these ideas? Or are they starting to want to work with you?
I mean, I'll work with the landlords to accomplish my goals. I'm not afraid of that. I mean, I think that there's some shared interest.
Absolutely.
Right? And so, finding ways to work with people, we're not going to agree on everything, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And sometimes tenants need to flex to demonstrate their political power. Right. And so that looks different than sort of a, collaboration based community organizing. Sometimes you have to be confrontational. I like a mix of both of those sort of styles.
Sure. Yeah. I just think it's interesting, especially like I said, the behind the scenes that I'm kind of creating these podcasts with both counter arguments, which I think is really neat, honestly, because I'm learning a lot. And not every guest that I have is going to share my viewpoint on everything. I mean, that's not the point, so I want to change gears, talk a little bit about some of the national stuff. I mentioned before about Ohio and how, Democrats in Ohio, Virginia, Kentucky, they definitely made their voices heard. I think that Donald Trump it has to be said that ever since the 2016 election, where he lost the popular vote and, then won the election, that every single election has gone terribly bad for the Republicans since then. I don't think it's going to change until he's not the face of the party. I don't want to get too optimistic because I think I'm wanting him to be gone from the picture, but because the poll numbers for Biden are not looking good and the Democrats are not listening to the people. One of the most striking poll numbers, 25% think that Biden has the stamina to be president. Well, 58% think Trump has the stamina. Well, we live in a 50-50 country. So that means that more Democrats are thinking that Biden or that Trump has the stamina to do it more than Biden. That's pretty sad. And so I think Biden is much more articulate than people give him credit. Both of these people, Biden's 81, Trump is a spry 77. He's a cheeseburger away from not being alive. choking on a cheeseburger or whatever. I don't know. I think that we're gonna see a repeat of 2016, and I think people are not here for it. There's been news today about Joe Manchin not seeking re-election for senator in West Virginia, and he's doing the exploratory to see if he's going to run third party. Which, yeah, I don't know if you saw that. That's huge. He didn't use the word run, but he said that he's exploring to see if there's a hunger in the community for a third party, which there is, and so my hope is that the Democrats are smart and that they see that, and Biden runs and Gavin Newsom runs, and we have an actual primary with maybe 3 or 4 debates if it's not too late, and we go from there. I watched a little bit of the Republican debate the other night. I don't know if you caught any of it.
I did not.
You did not? It was interesting. I mean, it was a lot of obviously empty promises, like most debates are, and it got pretty ugly between Ramaswamy and Nikki Haley. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know why anyone would care about those debates, considering that everyone knows that Trump is going to get the nomination. It's not even going to be close. It's insane. He's winning by like 40 or 50 points in every race. For the Republican primary. I do not understand it. I don't understand how people can see. I mean, I've been here till I was blue in the face talking about Trump, and I don't get it.
What New York Times had a podcast the other day where Trump is more popular when he is not on the media because he's not insulting people. And that Trump has a brand of populism that really does speak to people, and that when he is distant from the public, that he does better.
Yeah, we'll see. I got a comment from somebody, and I think it's kind of funny. They said, "This has been a great day. I made a liberal, a conservative, made my son move out of the basement and get a job." And that's a nice little jab they wanted to give us. Okay, thanks for that. And they said hello from Norway.
Hello,
Polar Nights. So yeah, hey, I'm not too big that I can't laugh at myself, so that's fun. Yeah, it'll be interesting, the national stuff. It's a train wreck. It's a train wreck, and I think people are disgusted. And then I personally don't talk about what's happening in Israel publicly because I think that there's too many, it's too hot button and too emotional to talk about publicly. But that being said, my heart goes out to everybody affected on all sides and people that are being categorized as the evildoers that have nothing to do with it. I just want to say my heart's with you on either, on all sides.
Yeah, there's a lot of working people that are just caught in the crosshairs.
Yeah, I think too that the people protesting is us as Democrats, I think, need to speak up a little bit about this. And this is just my opinion. People can get mad on. This is the one thing I will say. When you want to gather and show your vitriol and your anger, just you have to just accept who you're hurting. And so if you're going to do it, just remember who you might be hurting. So I support protests. I support people using their voice and all that stuff. But just remember, it comes with repercussions too. You have to, if you're doing something, you better actually stand for it. That's all I'm going to say. I mean, I want people to stand for what they believe in, but just make sure it actually means something to you. Because otherwise you're making a strong, bold stance, and it has an effect that you may not understand until you've done it. So,
yeah.
So, hey, Kevin Cronin, it's always cool. What is next for the Eugene Tenant Alliance?
So what's next is, we got to give people the tools to be able to purchase their homes. So a lot of people are getting their homes sold out from underneath them. We're seeing that these large REITs are real estate investment trusts. They can be publicly traded on Wall Street. They're coming after every single mobile home park that is within a 20-minute drive of I-5.
Wow.
And so what we need to do is we need to embrace the tenant opportunity or community opportunity to purchase. And so that when these things go up for sale, that we organize the residents to create a resident-owned community. That way their money stays local, and their affordability period is permanent. And so that's what we want to see is we want to move that model like they did over at the Patrician Park in Springfield, that's now called the Filbert Grove Cooperative, and they won the Golden Key Award for the best new home ownership project in the state. And so congrats to Filbert Grove. But we want to see that model move over to multifamily buildings as well. And so that way these vulture capitalists, when they come in and they raise the rent and then they leave, right? We can keep that capital local.
So like condos kind of thing is what you're saying. Like people like people can own in an apartment setting, more or less.
Yeah, I mean
that would be ideal.
We have Square One Village is doing that with their 60 unit development out on River Road, Peace Village. You can buy it's called a limited equity cooperative.
Yeah, I know that Westmoreland, there's a lot of that, where there's a lot of one of my buddies. It was the first time I'd ever seen it. It was and Bush was trying to get more people into homes, and there was basically like a lot of opportunities for first time buyer loans and stuff. And one of my buddies bought a condo, basically, that was just an apartment, more or less, and yet he buys it. There is downsides to that. The positive is that you have control over where you're at. You still have the same rules as an apartment, though, and you don't actually own. There's issues with it, but still, it gives you more stability, and that's what we're looking for.
Yes.
We just want people to have a stable place that they know is going to be there, and at least some assistance if it's all compromised. I mean, and that's what we're doing, folks. And so it's just about leveling the playing field and making sure that the people don't end up on the street and then, somehow become a drug addict. That's what, because there's honest people out there that become homeless that everyone's like, oh, drug addict. That's, wash my hands of it. They're a drug addict. I don't have to care about them.
Well, there's an Oregonian article from a couple weeks back that compares our drug addiction rate to West Virginia's and our homelessness. And so West Virginia has a way bigger drug problem than we do, but they have a much higher rate of home ownership and much more affordable rents. And so the takeaway from that is that drugs don't cause homelessness. High rents and people not affording their rent cause
addiction.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. That's the thing. That's not what it is. It's not all people that are using drugs that are on the streets. I mean, yes, that's a part of it, but there is a lot of people that are they slipped up, or, maybe, there's just so many factors. A lot of it is health and healthcare. A lot of it, most homelessness comes from unpaid hospital bills.
Essentially, everyone who's homeless has the same story of they were going along fine. They were living at a normal place. Then some event happened and they couldn't afford their rent. And then now they are homeless, right?
Yeah.
That event isn't necessarily a drug addiction.
Yeah,
it could be, but a lot of times it's, people not getting enough hours, or, people breaking their leg, or just not being able to work because of, or cancer diagnosis, or
right? Whatever, or death in the family, or,
yep.
That's one that I've heard a lot, where people, they just can't process losing someone that was so important to them. And so they have a little bit of an episode, which is totally understandable. I think, I've been there,
yep.
And so, yeah, it's tough. Hey, I really appreciate the work that you do. If you ever see Kevin's name, he's going to laugh because I know he's not trying to do this. But if you ever see Kevin's name on a ballot, make sure to vote for him. If he's running for city council or any of those things, we can get the bug in his ear a little bit. No, there's some great people in Eugene doing some great stuff, and even better people in Springfield. I'm just kidding. I just live in Springfield.
No, Springfield's great. Man.
Yes, we got some awesome people. But if you're interested in finding out more about the work that Kevin Cronin does with the Eugene Tenant Alliance, you can go to eugenetenantalliance.org. Is that right?
eugenetenantalliance.com.
Oh, .com.
Yep.
Okay, so it's official.
We're a PAC. So
a super PAC.
Yep.
So eugenetenantalliance.com. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm going to be doing this once a month. I'm going to probably pop in a couple more times because it's the holidays and I might have the time. If you've got show ideas, you can email me at patty@strpod.com. If you'd like to donate to the show, you can go to STRPOD. That's STRPOD.com. And you can make a one-time or monthly donation to donate to the show to help it grow. Hey, thank you so much.
Take care.